Now, I kind of already made the connection between the individual who maybe is looking to lose a little bit of body fat, but knows that they're probably going to need to build muscle as well at some point in the future. This is where I think the best way to get ahead of majority of people is to commit to eliminating these alternatives. Now, this is necessary regardless of the phase that you're starting with, whether you're starting with fat loss or you're starting with a growth phase. Either phase, you need to commit to eliminating the alternative, which is the other phase. The commitment to the phase that you're in is what's ultimately going to lead to more streamlined and an effective approach. And this is where I do think that you need to actively guide yourself and remind yourself, because it's okay that you're excited. It's okay that you might not be in your favorite phase. If you're someone who has a high propensity to build muscle, maybe you really like being in this build, but the diet itself sucks. It's really hard for you mentally, and you get really bogged down in the amount of weight that you're able to lift in the gym because it's not what you're used to. Or the alternative, you're in the build and you're like, you know what, this sucks. This is not what I want to do. This is really hard because I'm actually moving away from the physique that I want to have, seemingly. I think by limiting and really capping the number of to-dos that you can do at once and really identifying, like, can I lose fat and build muscle at the same time? The reality is you're not going to be able to do both effectively. You're not going to make progress in either direction in what I consider a meaningful way. And for me, when it comes to bodybuilding, one of the overarching principles has been efficiency and effectiveness of said phase. So in order to have a very effective phase, that means that I need to have tangible progress that can be measured. Now, in order for me to do this, I need to identify what are the alternatives that are impeding growth. Now, the third thing is addressing the most significant problem. Now, this often requires really deep analysis and effort, which is why many people opt for an easier task. A lot of people will fall into this position where they'll find that as they're getting into their fat loss phase, they're getting a little bit leaner, they're not holding on to muscle the way they thought they would. They may even be convinced that they're losing muscle. For a lot of people, they're not losing muscle, they're losing fat. They just never had the muscle that they thought they did in the first place. So with that, identifying that, like, hey, in order to achieve the physique that you want, in order to have the look that you're after, what you're going to need to do is spend time in a completely different phase, in quite literally the opposite phase, which is the build. That is what's going to allow you to put muscle on your physique, which ultimately is going to allow you to have the shape that you want the preceding fat loss phase. So for the client that's trying to build muscle, this means prioritizing whatever needs to be done in order for them to actually build. Now, we need to break this down into the tasks that allow them to build. So the training stimulus, the food intake, as well as the recovery. Now, a lot of people that I've worked with, a lot of people out there will gravitate towards any of these variables that comes easy to them. It's pretty common to avoid the task that it's going to require the most work, which is why we need to make sure that we're eliminating these low priority tasks or the ones that seemingly we can do with ease. Now, we have to consider the impact of said tasks. So in the case of the client who isn't training at the intensity they're supposed to, or not training in a way or executing the movements at a skill level that allows them to make meaningful progressions. This is someone who absolutely, if their goal is to build muscle, we need to walk this back and we need to figure out why they're not able to replicate this with ease. Now, this can also be said for the client who is really focused on the minutia of their physique changes in the build. So someone who, let's say, is hyper-focused on the circumference of their waist meal to meal. The sensation of feeling full bothers them, so ultimately it drives them to undereat, even though their goal is to build muscle. They check in, they're like, well, I felt pretty heavy today and my clothes felt a little bit tighter, so I cut back on food. Sure, that biofeedback is helpful, and it's important as a coach to understand if your client's mentally struggling with that phase that they're in, but that person is also, in the same instance, missing the fact that they're continuing to undereat, putting them back into a deficit, making it to where now, going into their training, they're not able to perform as effectively. If this is something that I see as a coach manifest repeatedly, yet we're still seeing that initial behavior of them undereating based on how they feel or how they look in the mirror specific to their waist. This might be a conversation that I broach with them over their next check-in, like, hey, Do you understand the consequences of these decisions that you're making and how they affect the overarching goal, the priority task, the critical task, which is to build muscle?